All right, everybody. We're going to make sure the mics don't cause too much trouble here. Thank you all for coming out tonight on this lovelier than we thought evening. My name is Stuart Rockoff. I'm the Executive Director of the Mississippi Humanities Council, and thank you for joining us for Ideas on Tap. Before we begin, I want to thank a bunch of people. First, I want to thank Tony Lewis and all the staff here at the Max for being such a wonderful host for us. We have, since the Max has been open, we've had a really nice, close relationship with them, and so we are very grateful that they have welcomed us into their beautiful building. I want to thank Mitchell Distributing for the beer. They donated the beer, so the beer is free. We also have a cash bar and food, so please help us eat that food. There's nothing I hate more than way too much food left over, so you can help me with that. What this is part of almost a year-long series of public discussions about education that we've been having all around the state. So far we've been to Jackson, Clarksdale, Hernando, Tupelo, and now we're in Meridian. We'll be in Biloxi in a little, sort of in a few weeks. This series has been sponsored by the Humanities Council, but underwritten by the Phil Hardin Foundation. So I want to thank Lloyd Gray and the board of the Hardin Foundation for your support of this important dialogue. So the way it works is we have two programs in each city. The first is sort of a larger kind of discussion about education policy. That's what tonight is. And then part two will focus on local issues. And so on October 17th, we'll be back here in the same spot. It'll be about 15 degrees cooler, 20 degrees cooler, so it'll be just perfect. And so please stay tuned for those details. We have some exciting ideas, and we hope to be able to announce those soon. Okay. So the overarching goal for this series is to engage with the ideas behind the policy debates that you may be familiar with. And what I've realized is that the sort of differences in these policy ideas are not really technical, but they really reflect different values. And so our goal is to try to understand those differences. Our goal is to have a civil exchange of ideas, and this is true for both the panel and the audience. As you will see, we have an ideologically diverse panel, and I imagine and hope we have an ideologically diverse audience, and that's what we're hoping for. And we know that education is an issue that a lot of people feel very, very strongly about. But I urge you to listen respectfully to our panelists, even if, especially if you don't agree with them, right? There will be time at the end for audience questions. If there's something is said that you really want to sort of challenge them on, you'll have a chance. But again, the idea is to try to increase our understanding of this issue. So, I want to introduce my panel. I've done this several times now, so bear with me, my friends here, but you all don't know these folks, most of you. To my left is Nancy Loome. Nancy Loome is the Executive Director of the Parents Campaign. Their vision as an organization is to engender a public education system that affords all students excellent public schools so that children can become what they dream. Their mission is to ensure a brighter future for Mississippi children by promoting better public schools through parent advocacy. By giving parents a means by which their voice can be heard, they are working together to change our state for the better. On my far right, we have Grant Callen. Grant is the founder and president of Empower Mississippi, which is an independent nonprofit advocacy organization dedicated to removing barriers to opportunity so that all Mississippians can flourish. Empower believes that Mississippians should have an opportunity to make choices that improve their lives and envision a Mississippi where every child has access to a high-quality education and parents have the freedom to choose, so that's the line, the best educational setting for their children. I will also note that they have been very active in working for criminal justice reform here in Mississippi. To my immediate right is Rachel Canter. Rachel is the Executive Director of the Mississippi First. Mississippi First champions transformative policy solutions, ensuring educational excellence for every Mississippi child. They are dedicated to advancing the best education policy ideas through research and analysis, public awareness, and issue education, as well as advocacy, implementation, and evaluation. So we really have three of the big fingers on education policy in our state, and so we're very grateful that they came over here tonight to be with us. I'm a historian by training, so I want to give a very, very brief history of public education in Mississippi because I think it helps to set the stage, to give context to the conversation. And I'm going to cover about 200 years in about 4 minutes, so bear with me. The question of whether there should be free public schools goes back to the earliest white settlement of the state. In 1802, Mississippi's territorial governor called for a system of free public schools. It didn't happen. In the 1840s, the issue came up again, whether they should create a statewide system of free public schools. But the plan largely failed due to their unwillingness to raise taxes to pay for it. At the time, school was seen almost as a luxury, right? Farmers didn't see the need for it. Craftsmen learned their trade through the apprenticeship system, and it was illegal to educate the majority of the Mississippi population who were enslaved. Wealthy Mississippians sent their children to private schools, hired private tutors. There was no consensus among the elites that a taxpayer-funded system of public schools would be of benefit to the state. The key turning point is the Civil War, as the Reconstruction government creates for the first time a system of public schools to help educate the freed slaves and the rest of Mississippians. So there's an 1870 school law which established this statewide system of free schools that would be financed by a school tax and authorized school boards in counties and municipalities to build schools as needed to meet local demands. This sounds very similar to the system we have today. In fact, it is the system. What also we saw was the creation of separate schools for blacks and whites. Originally, it was seen as the kind of path of least resistance, if you will. It's codified in the 1890 Constitution, in which there would be a dual system of white schools and black schools. Theoretically, we know they were supposed to be separate but equal, but in reality, we know they were anything but. This system is challenged by the Brown versus Board of Education ruling in 1954, and white Mississippi was particularly resistant to this ruling. In the mid-1960s, with increasing federal court pressure, there was a system developed called freedom of choice, in which parents could choose which schools to send their kids. In many ways, this was done along with social pressure to maintain segregation. We begin to see with the more federal pressure to integrate, so the more that takes place, we see the increase in the number of private schools. In fact, private schools grow in tremendous number after the 1970 court decision that finally forced the integration of public schools. Before 1964, there were only 3 non-parochial private schools in the state. By 1970, there were 236 private schools. And the number of private school students tripled between 1966 and 1970, again, as a resistance to integration. In many places, public resources were used to support these new segregated private schools. All right, so putting aside integration, Mississippi, both before integration and after, has always ranked low as a state in educational outcomes. Before 1982, Mississippi was the only state that didn't have a public kindergarten program. Only 45% of children who started first grade finished the 12th grade. The state had the nation's second highest rate of illiteracy. And 10% of kids didn't attend school at all because of weak attendance laws. And only 1 in 20 children attended preschool. In 1982, the Education Reform Act is passed through the Mississippi legislature and signed by Governor William Winter. And as we look back, and they look back with fondness on that great achievement, what's important to understand is it was hard fought. It was a difficult fight to get that bill passed. In 1997, see, I told you I'm jumping ahead, the Mississippi Adequate Education Program was established to help raise student achievement and lessen the funding divide between wealthy and poor districts. It created a funding formula, an adequate education formula, that was designed to help ensure a basic level of school funding. Since the formula's creation in 1997, the legislature has fully funded it only twice. So these debates are not new to Mississippi. So I want to bring my panel into the discussion now, and I want to start with sort of a short opening question that will help kind of introduce what they're going to be saying. And so in a brief statement, and I'll start to my left, Nancy, in your mind, what is the state of public education in Mississippi today, and how can we make it better?
Well, I think I know that the state of public education is that we are improving. As you just explained, can you all hear me? I'm on. There we go.
Yeah.
That better?
Yeah.
Okay. As Stuart just explained, for a long time we kind of were dragged into educating all of our people well, kicking and screaming through immigration. Can you hear me? If I speak up, no?
Yeah.
Okay. So we have a lot of room to make up because we thought that. And so we've been steadily moving in the right direction for the last couple of decades. In fact, we have been outpacing the national average in improvement on national test scores for a long time. We're chasing a moving target when we do that because every state is improving, but we're closing the gap. And we're not in last place. A lot of people think that Mississippi is still in last place, and we're not. When you disaggregate the test scores and you compare like students, for example, we know that in every state, we know that resources are very, very important to make sure that children get what they need. High quality pre-K, tutoring, high quality after school, that sort of thing. And so children who grow up in poverty are at an automatic disadvantage. It doesn't have anything to do with their innate ability. It's about the resources that are available to them. So in every single state, children who grow up in poverty, on average, of course there are exceptions, perform lower on standardized tests. But when you disaggregate the data and you compare all children who grow up in poverty, the ones in Mississippi to everyone else's, and the children who don't grow up in poverty to everyone else's children who don't grow up in poverty, our rankings skyrocket. For example, in 4th grade math, we would be 12th in the nation if every state had the same population. So what that tells us is that our teachers are doing a better job than the teachers in most other states. But we have more challenges, and so we can't be satisfied with that. Now, number one, what we need to do is make sure that we cure poverty. That is the number one thing holding children back. When they don't have the resources they need to level the playing field, they just don't have the same chance that other children do. But we are finding ways to compensate for that at a rate that is better than what other states are doing, and so that is really good news. And what we can do about that, continue that upward trajectory, but at the same time, we've got to find a way to address poverty. It is a real issue, and it is harming our children, and it harms all of us. It's probably one of the best things that we can do.
Okay. Grant, why don't you answer? So what is your sense of the state of public education in Mississippi today? How do we make it better? Yeah.
Well, first I'll say it's a delight to be here. I'm from Laurel, so this feels like I'm in the neighborhood, and glad to be here. I grew up coming to here a lot. So this is our 5th stop, and each of these has been a delight to have this conversation that I think is a really important conversation for our state and for this moment in our state while we're about to enter into a new 4-year legislative and sort of political cycle. So I think the state of public education in Mississippi is it's a tale of two cities. For much longer than my lifetime, and for much longer than the lifetime of really anybody here, We have had a system, we've had two systems. We've had one system for one group of people, and we've had another system for another group of people. And for a long time, we called that separate but equal, and it wasn't. We all knew it wasn't. We look back, we can see it wasn't. And today, in large part, we still have a system of one set for people who have some kind of financial resources and another education system for those who don't. So what do I mean by that? Well, in Mississippi, there are places where public education is thriving, where students are achieving great things, they're on a path to college or career, and there are communities that are strong because of that. But there are also communities, and there are too many of those to name individually, where public education is not thriving, and it is has been underperforming and holding kids back for decades and decades. The difference is, if you're a family that has some kind of financial means, then you have inherent options. You can afford to move to those districts where there is a thriving public school system, or you can afford private education, or you can make the necessary sacrifice to homeschool your child, but you have options. Today in Mississippi, if you are low income, there's a great likelihood that you're going to find yourself in an underperforming school system. You are going to find yourself without the resources to move to a better neighborhood with a better school system, and you're not going to be able to afford a private education. The data is abundantly clear that in Mississippi today, if you are African American, if you are low income, or if you are special needs, the chances of you getting a world-class education are slim to none. It happens, but it's a travesty that it happens so infrequently. That's what we're faced with. So my organization supports school choice as amongst an array of things we'd like to see happen in education, because if you have financial means, you already have choice. Mississippi's always had school choice, it's just for people who can afford it. So we're interested in how do we empower low-income families with some of the same tools and options that are already available to those who have money. And charter schools are one way to do that. Public choice, where you have freedom to attend a school maybe in a neighboring district or in maybe across town, is another way to do that. Education scholarship accounts are another way to do that. None of those are the end goal, that every parent is, every child is in a charter school or exercising choice or having an ESA or a voucher. Those are a means to help improve the educational system for all, and there's mountains of data to show that when choice is implemented, it not only helps the kids who are left behind who take advantage of those options, but it can help the public school system as well. So our goal is to have a world-class public education system for Mississippi, and until we get there, we ought to give parents who have waited a long time, we ought to give their kids options today to make sure they have the tools to get their kids in an educational setting today.
And we're going to come back to this issue, so don't worry. But Rachel, I'd love to get your take on this question. And certainly, we just saw the release of the school district accountability numbers just today. So I'd love for you to get a sense of what is the state of public education in Mississippi today, and how do we make it better?
So my name is Rachel Canter. I think maybe my microphone is not close enough to be. I'm just going to hold it. I am the executive director of Mississippi First. We are specifically an education policy nonprofit, and we focus on pre-K-12 public education issues. So let me first start with the first part of the question, which is what I think about the state of public education today. And I would say that we are in an inflection point in public education in Mississippi. I think that a lot of things that Nancy said are correct. We have been steadily improving for a while now. In the last 10 years, we've been improving at a faster rate than the national average, which means we are closing the gap between us and the national average, which is something that we have to do and continue to do to catch up to the national average. We can't just improve, we have to improve at a faster rate. And we have made a lot of fundamental changes in public education in the last 10 years. We adopted college and career ready standards in 2010. We actually started to implement them a few years later. We changed our tests to be more aligned to those college and career ready standards. We passed a pre-K law. There was a tremendous new focus on literacy. We've passed a couple of other bills that have had things to do. We changed our grading system. And I think what you see is we upped all of our standards, we upped the rigor of our tests, and even though there was a drop-off in the beginning, we've seen kids start to rise to the challenge. And all of these things are connected. But I think we're at a point now where it would be easy to sort of sit back and say, it's been much too much change, much too quickly, let's just stand still for a little while and let people adjust. And the risk that we run in doing that is that we're going to halt our forward progress. And I think that at the same time, people are bringing up very real and very serious challenges. We've got a serious issue with teacher pay. And I think that that issue with teacher pay is more than just about the dollars that people are paid in their salaries, although it is about that in a very real way. I think teachers are also saying, we do not feel valued above and beyond what you're paying us in terms of dollars. We don't feel valued. And we don't feel like that the job that we do is a sustainable job to live and have a family and be supported in our lives. And that is a real and serious challenge. I think we're also seeing people say, hey, we understand that tests are important, because every single time we actually poll the public about this, people say, we don't want to get rid of tests. We know tests are important. We just don't want too many of them. And I think that if we make sure that when we have tests, that they are meaningful, they measure meaningful things, they give teachers meaningful data, and we're not spending a lot of instructional time on it, then we're going to see more improvement. But I'm very worried that we could go one of two directions at this point in time. We're going to have a new sort of state leadership, even though the department is going to, Carrie Wright is still going to be our state superintendent. We're going to have some new folks in the legislature. People have different ideas about how that could go, and it could go very differently depending on who is elected. And I think what we have to do is we have to keep our eye on the ball. Change is necessary, but we don't want change for change's sake. We have to let people adjust to change, but we need to keep pushing forward. We have to stay serious about some of the big things that are being talked about. We have to get serious about teacher pay, about how teachers are trained and supported. We have to think differently about curriculum. We have to think differently about the way that we use data in schools and not just testing to test. And so those are a lot of my feelings about what I think the state of public education is today. In terms of the grades, I'll just say briefly that we are seeing a continuous upward trend with how well schools and districts are doing on state tests, which is primarily what the school grading system is based on, except if you're in high school, there's a lot of other different kinds of measures. But we are seeing an upward trend. But I think the problem is that we see consistently the same people at the bottom. Even though most people are moving up, we are consistently seeing the same schools and districts at the bottom, which means that we are going to start to also have some divergence in our state in terms of the haves and have-nots that is worse than what we already have. So that's another thing that is on my mind every day that we need to be thinking about in a rigorous way.
Great, thank you. You referenced the election. I should just note that we are in election season, and my panelists may well express political opinions. They are free to do so. This is a free speech space, but please know that their opinions do not necessarily reflect those of the Mississippi Humanities Council. We are a neutral organization, all right? So y'all go to town on it. Okay. Well, let me talk a little bit about policy. And Grant, let me start with you. You mentioned ESAs. Now, ESAs are what other folks call vouchers, basically taking public money, giving them to families that they can then spend in private schools. And I know now the program is limited to children with special needs, but I know that on your dream wish list it would be open to everyone. So I want to talk about, so I want you to answer, while this program might benefit individual families getting money to move their kids to a private school, does it serve the common good? And doesn't this program, if it's expanded and grows as you want, on, does this have the potential of substantially weakening public schools?
So it's a good question. The special needs ESA program that Stuart mentioned passed in 2015, and it was created in response to a crisis in the special education community. At the time, there was broad agreement that we were failing kids in Mississippi that have special needs. And I'll note we've made some measurable progress that is worthy of celebration, but we've got a long way to go. And there are still far too many kids across the state who have special needs who are not getting what they need. So this program was created by the legislature in order to say, look, let's fix public education, but along the way, let's give these kids who are falling behind tomorrow, let's give them something that'll help them immediately. And that's where most of these school choice efforts are about. It's how do we help the whole system? These are not mutually exclusive. It's not about do we do choice or do we help public schools. It's about we got to do something to help all kids as soon as possible. And so this program was created in response to a crisis, and it was created to do that. And what it did was it allows parents who have a child who have been in public school, who have an IEP, so the district has evaluated them and said, yes, this child has a special education disability. If the district is not meeting their needs, the parents can take a scholarship account and have the freedom to use those funds at a school that will meet their needs. And it has been wildly successful. And I'm really proud of the progress. That program, parents love it because they're able to shop around and find the best setting for their child. They're using these scholarships at nearly 100 different schools around the state. It's not just in Jackson, it's spread out from the Tennessee line to the coast, east and west. The peer committee is a legislative watchdog group. They surveyed parents and said, tell us, are you satisfied with this program and your new school compared to the previous school you were in? And they said 93% of parents were satisfied with their current school. Only 24% were satisfied with their previous school. So that's progress. There's a lot of improvements that could be made to the program. It has not been administered very well. I will tell you the Department of Education has been a real bear for parents, a real hurdle for them getting the scholarship and using it, and it's made it really challenging for families to use it. If you're an educator and you work in a classroom, that probably won't surprise you that the Department of Education isn't always helpful. There's a lot of reform that needs to happen there. I would like to see, one of the criticisms of the program is that there's not a testing component. They're coming for us. But one of the criticisms is that it doesn't have a testing component. And I would support, and have supported all along, a way to measure the student's academic progress. I just don't want to see you force private schools to take the state test, which many of them don't like and wouldn't offer. So you would have some of the best private schools potentially opt out of the program. I would like to see you require students to take a nationally norm reference test, which you could then measure students' progress and see year over year, are they making progress? That program is not a panacea. It's not a solution for everything. It has put a spotlight on special education. We've seen broad improvement in special education achievement scores and graduation rates. We've advocated to see that program expanded to other at-risk constituencies. I would love to see it expanded to low income. I'd love to see it expanded to students that are zoned for a failing school district. Again, who are the people that already have choice in Mississippi? It's those with some kind of financial resources. Those who don't ought to have additional options. And let's do that while we're working to improve public education.
Nancy, now I know that you are a strong opponent of the ESA program, so I'm sure you will respond to Grant's points, but I also want you to respond to this. He makes a good point that in places like Rankin County, Oxford, DeSoto that have A-rated successful schools, that that's a district that works for kids in those areas. But what do you say to the parent of a kid who lives in a community that has a failing school who sees this program, ESA program, maybe a charter school program, as their best chance to give their child a good education? How do you respond to those parents? And how do you respond to arguments in favor of it?
Well, so the reason that we have public schools is to make sure that all children have access to a quality education. And our obligation as a state is to make sure that happens. So where we don't have schools that are successful, our obligation is to improve those schools so that every child does have a good public school to attend. Giving money to a couple of parents to send their children to a private school that may not be any better than the public school. We don't have any idea because they don't take any assessments, and Grant doesn't want them to take the same assessment so that we can actually compare them. But that doesn't help the rest of the kids that are left in that school. The reason we pay taxes, we all pay in a little so that everyone can have something good. And when you start to tear that apart by saying, you take yours and go over here, and you take yours and go over there, everyone is diminished. Public schools are for the public good. Public taxes, public funds are intended for the public good, not for somebody's individual wish list. We don't take our tax dollars and hand them out so that individual people can go pave their own road. Well, supposedly we don't do that. Buy their own security system if they don't like the law enforcement system in their community. We pay into a system that is there for everyone, to serve everyone, and where we are falling short, our obligation is to fix it for everyone. What the voucher system is doing is subsidizing those same people that he was talking about who already have a choice.
That's right.
There are 8 school districts that have more than 10 students using a voucher that live within the school district. 6 of them are rated A. You mentioned Oxford and Rankin County, they are 2 of them. The districts that you're talking about that are chronically failing, that's not where students are using vouchers. We are subsidizing parents who just want us to pay their kids tuition to private school. That's not a good use of our tax dollars, and it's why our Constitution actually says that our tax dollars, our public dollars, our state constitution says that our public dollars may not go to schools that charge tuition. So the program is unconstitutional. They'll say that it's not really because we're first giving the money to parents to go spend at the private school. But that certainly violates the spirit of the Constitution. The Constitution has that clause in it because they know that we did have a choice system in the past that was designed to keep schools segregated. And so our Constitution has a clause in it to prevent that because it's not a good way for us to spend our tax dollars.
Now, the term school choice, it also involves vouchers, it also involves charter schools. And so, Rachel, I know Mississippi First has been a strong advocate for school choice for charters, and you've been very involved in the creation and in the evaluation of charter schools. So I'd like you to talk a little bit about that. Now, one thing to know is Mississippi is relatively late to the game of charter schools. Other states have been doing it for much longer. And I know you've read a lot more studies than I have, so you can push back on it. But the studies that I've read have looked at charters in other states, and it's been kind of a mixed bag at best. There's been a lot of abuse, sort of a lot of failing schools. So how successful is Mississippi's relatively new charter program? And if it has been successful, why has it been successful? This is a 3-part question. And are there costs to that success, to the existing public schools?
Okay. So let me start with some basic information about charter schools because I tend to forget that people are not as well versed in these issues as I am. And the last time that I was on one of these panels in Hernando, there was a woman in the audience who very clearly got confused between vouchers and charter schools. And she asked a question that was clearly about vouchers, but she called them charter schools. So let me start with what charter schools are here in Mississippi and nationwide. So charter schools by law and by practice are public schools. They are public schools in that they do not charge tuition. They cannot select their students. Anyone who puts in an enrollment form and lives in the district boundary is allowed to go to a charter school, and if there are too many kids, it goes to a lottery. They are required to take the same state tests. They are graded on the same scale. They cannot discriminate against kids based on any reason that a traditional public school cannot discriminate against them. They don't charge tuition. Pretty much where they have flexibility is that they are not run by a local school board. They are run by an independent nonprofit organization. And here in Mississippi, it is required that charter schools be run by nonprofit organizations.
Is that important?
Yes, I actually think it is important. And let's go down that rabbit hole after I after I finish this part. Charter schools here in Mississippi have only been around. The law was passed in 2013. So the oldest schools that we have 2 schools that are now in their 5th year of operation. Both of those schools are in Jackson. Actually, most of our charter schools are in Jackson. There are 6 charter schools this year. 5 of them are in Jackson and 1 is in Clarksdale. Under the law, charter schools can only open in schools that are rated, in school districts that are rated D or F, unless the local school board gives a charter school permission to open. People who want to open a charter school have to go through an extremely rigorous process where they apply to a state agency. It is about a 6-month process from beginning to end. There's multiple stages. They have to put in an extremely long and detailed educational plan that then is rigorously evaluated by both national and local experts. They have to go through a capacity interview, and then they have to be approved by the state board. This is why we only have 6 charter schools, and why there was only 1 charter school that was newly approved, so that we will have 7. The 7th one will open in Greenwood this year. Will open next year. It was newly approved this year. So, charter schools, as the state Supreme Court recently affirmed, are public schools, but they are not run by local school boards. So what does this really mean? Why would we have public schools that are not run by local school boards? Why would you allow that? So the charter school movement started in 1991 in Minnesota. It was started as an idea to try to figure out new ways of operating public schools that might be more innovative than traditional public schools. So Minnesota passed the first public charter school law. Since then, these laws have proliferated across the country. Often, the studies that you see, especially early on, within the first 10 years, there were very mixed studies. But in the last, I would say, 5 to 10 years, we're seeing a clearer and clearer picture around what charter schools work and what the conditions need to be for them to work. The idea behind them is to provide public school options for parents and children in public school districts, traditional public school districts that have been impervious to improvement over a long period of time. Now, there are people in the charter movement who would say, I think charter schools should be able to open wherever. I think they should be able to open in the highest performing districts and the lowest performing districts, but our law was specifically written to allow kids who would not have a good public school to go to have another choice in public schools. When the studies started to come out in the last 10 years or so, what we've seen is that now we have lots and lots of studies that show that states that have very rigorous charter school laws are much more likely to have highly performing charter school sectors. That means they're careful around who can open schools, they're careful around what those schools have to show to stay open, and they have been more rigorous around closing schools that don't perform well. There is a study that came out in 2015 called the Urban Charter School Study that specifically looked at charter schools in urban areas to see if charter schools in urban areas, on average, outperform traditional districts. And what they found is that yes, children in urban charter schools, on average, outperform their traditional school district peers after 4 years in the school. Typically what happens is a child that would transfer to a charter school so then they have to catch up. By the fourth year, they are way outperforming their peers. And when you look at it in terms of the number of school days, like what's the difference if you were to say, break it down to how many more days of learning? It's like half a year more of learning that kids in charter schools have by the fourth year. Now we finally have 4 years of data for our oldest 2 schools. One of the schools is a perfect encapsulation of that. When they started, the first year they started, they had a D on the state system. Then they moved to a higher D. Then they moved to a C. And this year they're a B. This is a middle school in Jackson that serves kids that look exactly like every other child in middle school in Jackson. In fact, they are more likely to have an IEP than the average child in a middle school in Jackson.
That's a special need designation.
Yes, that is a designation that you qualify for special education services. If you walked into that school, you may be surprised because we continue to have people who post on our Facebook page who apparently do not know that nearly 100% of children in charter schools in the state of Mississippi are not white. But that, these are the same kids that you would see in a traditional public school district. But now they are in the highest rated middle school in the city that does not selectively enroll kids for academic performance. And so this is like a perfect encapsulation of that research that shows that when you do right by kids, every single child can learn at high levels. Now the other school is Midtown. And Midtown is a school that was started not by a charter management organization, it was started by a local group. And it has really struggled. And there is no, hiding that fact. They were an F the first year, they were an F the second year, they were an F the third year. And if they had been an F again this year, they would not have been eligible to stay open. Because our law is very specific. If you're an F in your final year, you are not allowed to continue to operate a school. Because why would we have schools that aren't any better than the other schools we already have? And what the performance framework says, which is the document that we use to evaluate schools, it says that if you're an F in your fourth year, you're not even eligible to apply for renewal. Well, the data came out, and they actually grew tremendously. So they moved from, and tremendously still means they're a D, but they grew tremendously. They were one of the highest, if you look at schools, they were one of the highest growing schools in the state, like number 7 or something.
So we've seen progress.
We have seen tremendous progress, and it's because the school is under new leadership. But a D is not good enough. You can go to a traditional public school in Jackson and still be in a D middle school. A D is not good enough. So they are going to have to convince the state authorizer board that this is not a fluke, that they will continue on this trend, and that they will end up with scores that look more like Reimagines, where they are having non-selective enrollment kids, same kids in Jackson, a B-rated middle school. It is very hard to get a B with a middle school, let me just say. The work is really hard. The work is really, really, really hard with any child who does not come from an advantaged background. It is hard work. And folks in these schools believe in kids, and they are doing the things that are necessary. It's not that I don't believe that folks in Jackson Public Schools don't believe in kids. I think that Jackson Public Schools for a very long time suffered from a lack of leadership. And I have a lot more hope for JPS now than I have had in 10 years. We have a brand new superintendent. He's only been there a little over a year. He's slowly replacing people and turning over roles in the district. And I believe we have to have both. We have to have a strong traditional public school system, and we have to allow parents to have other public schools that they can go to, because parents cannot wait 5 years. And that's what it takes to turn around a large school system. It takes at least 5 years. You cannot ask a parent to wait until their child is in 5th grade before you've gotten your act together. You just can't do it. It is not fair, and I don't think it's ethical.
So can I respond to Nancy before we take it in a different direction?
Sure.
And I just kind of want to echo Rachel. Again, so much of the education debates in our state have become us versus them, or this side or that side. And I think that's incredibly harmful. This has to be about both ends. We have to solve public education and we have to give parents options in the meantime. You know, I got involved in this really early in my interest in in education policy. I met a lady named Cynthia who lives in Canter, and I got to know her because she had a 5th grader named Will. And Canton is not a great public school system. There's drugs, there's violence, there's gang issues, and she's a single mother trying to raise this guy, and he's got big dreams of wanting to be a doctor. And I got to know her because she was desperate for another option. And there were great public schools right across the street from where she lived in Madison, but she couldn't afford to move to Madison. And so she felt really, really trapped, and she didn't have the money for private schools. And every day on the way to work, she would drive past Madison public schools, which are great, and she could not figure out a way to get her kid in there. And we tried to help her, and we couldn't get her kid in there. All of this is great when we talk about averages, and we talk about letter grades, and we talk about improvements in a statewide level. We have to do that. But we've also got to remember this is about individual kids and parents who are trying to help their kids get a better education, and they're seeing it slip away. And they got to recognize telling them that the focus needs to stay on public education and let's help everybody, that doesn't mean anything to a mom like Cynthia who's watching her kid fall behind. And why should she have to choose to wait for the whole system to improve for her child to get something better? Let's do both. And that's where I think we can do that. I think charters are a way to do both. ESAs are a way to do both. Let's get teacher pay up. Let's invest in education. Let's do it. Let's do all of the above.
The problem with that proposal is that Will, the child, absolutely deserves a great school. So do all of Will's peers that are left back in Canton. We are, it's just wrong to say that Will gets a voucher to go. And here's the other thing that you need to understand about these vouchers. Only less than half of the vouchers that have been given out to these children have been used. And the reason nobody in the survey that Peer did said it's because MDE made it so hard. That assertion,
yes, it did.
MDE held 5 times the number of lotteries they were required to hold. They really tried to give these vouchers away. What parents said was, I can't afford the tuition that the schools charge above and beyond what the voucher pays, because the private schools are allowed to charge tuition in excess of what the voucher pays. So you still can't use a voucher unless you can pay the balance of the tuition. They also said they couldn't find a private school that met the needs of their special needs child because the law, this voucher law that supposedly is designed for children with special needs, says that the private schools do not have to provide any special services at all for the children. In fact, the only way that a parent can have their child be eligible for the voucher is if the parent signs a form saying that giving up the child's right to receive special education services. This is a law that was designed for private schools. They get to pick and choose which students they accept and deny any students they don't want to take. They charge tuition above and beyond. They don't provide, most of them don't provide, they're not required to provide any transportation to school. And so these parents that Grant is talking about can't use these vouchers, but what it does is take away money that could be going to public schools, because you can't spend those dollars twice. If you take those dollars away and spend them on vouchers for private schools, they're not available dollars to spend on public schools. We need to be investing this year where we're giving away all this money in vouchers. Special education in public schools is underfunded by $28 million. That's special education teachers that our legislature is refusing to pay for in our public schools. And so it does hurt your public schools when you spend millions of dollars on vouchers. That's money that we could be spending to provide high-quality special education teachers in our public classrooms.
So, you know, and I think y'all did a really nice job of encapsulating this philosophical difference, right? Versus individual versus what's good for the individual versus what's good for the overall society. I had a whole section on accountability. I'm not going to go there because I want to get to equity. But I just, yeah, we're going to, but certainly, so we talked about sort of the importance of these tests. But I want to talk about equity. And the questions about how our current system of schools are being funded. There have been stories recently in the press that have shown very wide disparities between neighboring school districts. Oftentimes rich versus poor. In Mississippi, oftentimes white versus black. So Rachel, I know you've thought a lot about this. I'd love to get your thoughts. Is our state's current system of public school funding, the MAEP, is it equitable? And if not, how can we make it fair?
So let me do the same thing that I did before. MAEP is the Mississippi Adequate Education Program. It is the state's funding formula for public schools, including both traditional public schools and charter schools. They're all funded the same way through the same formula. The formula was written in 1997 as a response to all of these lawsuits that were happening around the country, where people started to say they would see these huge disparities between the amount of funding that rich districts were getting and poor districts were getting. And there were groups all over the country that started suing states under their state constitutions to say this is not legal under our state constitution because our state constitution requires that you provide adequate education to everyone equitably. It should be funded adequately and equitably. And so Mississippi, this is why the word adequate is in our funding formula law. It is not just because legislators thought, oh, well, we only want adequate schools. No, it is specifically a response to these lawsuits that were coming around the country. That word was kind of a magic word to people back then. And I said back then, it's like 20 years ago, but 1997. And so when the law was passed, it was one of the more progressive laws in the country because it had a mechanism in it to try to equalize the amount of funding that rich and poor districts got to make it more on par. And even today, this MAP makes it so that on average, there's only about, on the statewide average, there's about a 5% disparity statewide between what a wealthier district and a poorer district might get. But it's not perfect because there are still some wide disparities between what property wealthy districts are getting under the state formula or able to put into their schools and what property poor districts are able. And I want to make sure to say property wealthy and property poor because although there are most of the time, if the people there are poor, the property is also not very, you can't get a lot of money out of the property when you tax it. That's not always the case. There are some school districts where the people are actually very poor, but there is like a big asset in the community where there's a plant or something else like that that is worth a lot of money. And so some school districts that actually have very poor kids have a lot more money for their school districts than others. But on average, this is what it looks like. I think that it has been 20 years since we passed MAP. There are some very good things about MAP, and it did do its job. But I think now, 20 years later, we need to start thinking more. We need to think, okay, what is MAP 2.0? What does a system look like that would go farther in making it more equitable and close some of the loopholes that exist in MAP that allow property wealthy districts to continue to have more money and retain more money, even all while their folks in their school district pay lower taxes than property poor districts who actually tax themselves more and end up with less overall. There is a loophole in the state formula called the 27% rule. We have a 15-minute whiteboard drawing video on our Facebook page if you want to learn all the ins and outs of it. I'm not going to bore you with it now. But essentially what it means is that the state law subsidizes very wealthy school districts. We subsidize them instead of subsidizing very poor school districts. I think we need to change that. We need to close the 27% rule. At the same time, we need to put more money into the funding formula overall. There are We are asking a ton of school districts right now. We are asking a ton of teachers. The number one source for teacher pay is MAEP. If we do not put more money into MAEP, we will not have more money for teacher pay. That is where school districts get their money to pay teachers. Most of the money that every school district gets from the state goes directly into teacher salaries. We need to make sure we are paying people fairly, which means we need to make sure that MAEP is not just more fair between wealthy and poor districts, but that there is more money in the system. I think it's perfectly fair to ask people to be accountable to those dollars and to be accountable to kids and be accountable to performance. But we have to give people the resources to be successful. So I very strongly support an MAEP 2.0 attempt. I think it needs to be transparent. I think we need to talk about it and engage people in their voices before we do it so people understand it and understand what's at stake. But I do think we have to do it. It's one of those inflection point things. We need to do this to keep moving forward. We've got to think differently.
So Nancy, I know that you certainly agree with putting more money into the formulas for schools, but what are your thoughts about how the formula is designed? I mean, is it fair?
Well, it actually is a better formula than most of them in the United States. I mean, there have been some studies that have shown that. But I agree with Rachel that there are some things there are some areas where it can be improved. For example, right now we don't have anything in the formula to compensate districts with high numbers of children who don't speak English, English language learners. And we need to do something there. But a word of caution. So I do agree that there are ways that the formula could be improved. It still is one of the best formulas in the United States. So you can always make it worse. Here's what I would say about that. We need to elect people who agree with us about what a formula needs to do and that it needs to have more money in it. Because, there was a recent attempt, a couple of years ago, there was an attempt, a proposal to rewrite the funding formula for schools. But the goal of the leadership in that attempt to change the formula was to decrease the amount of funding that was required to go to schools, to decrease the state's obligation. They did not want to put more money, they wanted to put less money, and they didn't like the fact that they were beaten up about not fully funding schools. And so what they wanted to do was just lower the requirements so they could say they were fully funding schools and not put any more money into the formula. So we need to elect people who will support a sincere effort to provide schools the resources they need to continue the progress that we've been making. Our children deserve that. Our local communities deserve that. Mississippi will never meet her full potential until we decide to invest in our public education system at a level that allows our teachers and students to compete fairly with the teachers and students in other states. And I'm not talking about a funding formula that would provide a per student cost that aligns with New York or California. I understand their cost of living is different, that would be different. I'm talking about our next door neighbors. I'm talking about Alabama, Arkansas, Louisiana, and Tennessee. They outspend us on average by more than $1,000 per student. And here's the other thing that you need to know about that. So the leadership will tell you that they can't fully fund the MAEP because it's just unreasonable. Even if the MAEP were fully funded, our neighboring states would outspend us per student by more than $600 a student. Even if it were fully funded. That we're talking about Arkansas, y'all. That's not unreasonable. That's not unreasonable.
I'm going to open to the audience in just a second. I want to give Grant a chance to kind of weigh in on this issue of equity. And I want you to address, because I know you've probably thought about this. I mean, how do you reckon with the sort of ugly history of the terms school choice, public money going to private schools, that was a resistance to school integration? I mean, is that something that, you think about? And what does equity look like from the perspective, of other colleges? Sure.
Well, I think equity matters. And I think equity means all kids have access to a great education. And I don't think we have that today. I think MAP gets some things right and it gets a lot of things wrong. You know, I liked a lot of what was proposed a couple of years ago in terms of the new formula because I think it would have been more student-centered, it would have been more transparent, it would have solved some of the challenges that are inherent in MAP where it doesn't address ESL. There's currently only a 5% add-on for at-risk students, and we know it costs more than that. The way special education is handled in MAP is not student-centered at all. So there were a lot of things that could be improved, but I think those could be, we could have MAP 2.0 where you make changes to the existing formula as well, and that may be the way to do it, I don't know. I think there has to be ways to make it more transparent and more student-centered, and the states that are doing that, that is what most states are doing when you're seeing states around the country that are either making changes to their formula. They're moving towards a weighted student funding formula because it is more equitable. I guess your issue on choice, there's no doubt we have an ugly history. There is no denying that most of the academies in Mississippi were started because white folks didn't want their kids to go to school with black folks. And I think that's a travesty. I think that is not the only experience of people in Mississippi related to private schools. We saw Catholic schools were serving kids long before that. And in large part, Catholic schools have always been much more diverse. They've cared more about serving the needy and the at-risk. I think simply because catastrophic decisions were made 50, 60, 70 years ago cannot be a stumbling block for us doing what's right today. We can't go back and say everybody must send their kids to public school. If we did, and we had a law that said you all have to have your kids in public school, you know what, I bet we'd have a lot better public schools because everybody would demand it. But because people in many corners of the state have already opted out of public education or have opted into different communities where they have access to better public education. Both of those are school choice. Moving to better school districts is school choice. Moving to private school is school choice. Both of those things are already happening. You've got to figure out ways to allow that to continue happening, but to give access to that freedom to those who don't currently have it. And that's the impetus for choice. And look, I love seeing, if you look at the private school landscape across Mississippi, it's changed. There are about a half dozen private schools that are black-led in the Delta, just that I know of. There may be a lot more that I've had a chance to visit and tour where they are providing great access, great education to kids who are desperate for another option, and they're providing that option. There are schools in Jackson that are doing the same thing. That we're slowly breaking the stigma that private school means white. It shouldn't mean that. It ought not mean that. It simply means currently it means you got to be able to afford tuition. And we got to change that calculus so that other people have access to those options as well.
All right, questions from the audience? Yes, Ann, we have a microphone. Yeah. Or else just stand up and shout. There's a railroad in Meridian.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I heard a lot of heard a lot of parents choosing, but wouldn't it be more plausible to put tax money into public schools? That way kids whose parents don't necessarily care get that option as well. And I think that every child has an option because they can't help who their parents are. And some parents just don't care. And so wouldn't it be smarter just to put all of that money rather than making charter schools and trying to give vouchers to parents who care for their children and give all children the same opportunity.
Well,
parents are equal.
Let me start. So let me. So you've hit on something that's a little bit of a pet peeve of mine, and I want to explain it to you, which is that we make this assumption that there are some parents that don't care. And often when we say that, and I'm not saying that you meant it this way, often when we say that, we mean that poor black parents don't care. And I know, but I'm gonna tell you I'm gonna explain why this is a pet peeve of mine. If you go into Jackson Public Schools and you talk to parents, the reason that Jackson Public Schools has been so low performing for a long time is not because parents in Jackson Public Schools don't care. It is not because poor black parents don't care. You do not have to have money to care about your children. And it's very important to me because we say that the only parents that care, only parents who care are going to try to get their child into a charter school. Right. But I think the reality is that some parents have more information than other parents. Some parents have more support than other parents. But parents have been demanding for better in their schools for decades, and we have not been listening to them because the power structure is impervious to change, and it is not because parents don't care. Are there some exceptional people out there who, because of their whatever is going on in their heads, they have a baby that they can't take care of? Yes. That is not the vast majority of people who are in low-performing schools in America. This is not a problem of parents don't care. It is a problem of we've got people with power and money who benefit from the system that we have now, and they do not want to see it change. I believe that we should have more money in traditional public schools. I believe we should support traditional public schools, and I believe we should do everything in our power to make every traditional public school excellent. But I am not going to tell parents that they have to sit and wait, because it is the same parents that we tell every year to sit and wait for something different. And I will tell you, those parents do not look like me that we tell that to. And that is my soapbox, and I'm going to get off it now.
Okay, so she said that a lot better than I could. I will echo every word she said, and then I will add, it's a false choice to force people to choose public education or helping parents, because we absolutely must do both. What we're talking about is we spend over $2 billion in Mississippi on public education. This ESA program is, this year they spent $5 million. We're talking about a tiny, tiny drop in the bucket that is providing hope and an open door of opportunity to kids that were falling behind. We must do both, but not to the detriment of public education. Florida is the best example of this. Florida, over the last 20 years, has done a lot of education reform. Part of that reform has been a broad expansion of school choice. They have expanded charter schools, they have expanded vouchers, they have tax credit scholarships, they have an ESA. 46% of the kids in Florida attend a school beside the ones they're zoned for. Nearly half the kids in Florida attend a school different from the one they're zoned for. Now, a lot of those, the vast majority are still in public school, but they're in a charter public school or a different public school from the one they're zoned for. And what has happened over these last 20 years is Florida has seen massive improvements in their public education achievement, and they have closed the achievement gap in more than a lot of other states. They've seen tremendous growth. They've been one of the most significant states in closing that achievement gap between the haves and the have-nots. So choice cannot be to the exclusion of public school. We have to do both.
Let me say too, just to clarify something that Grant said. Florida does have vouchers, and they do have charter schools. And one of the things that Florida has done recently is that they have stopped testing their voucher students because they didn't like the answer that they got. The public school students consistently outperformed the voucher students. So that's a change that they've made.
Now voucher students aren't tested.
Right, our voucher students are not tested at all, so we don't have any idea.
Any other questions out there?
But the point is that public education, in spite of that, we heard these horror stories about how vouchers are going to hurt public education and ESAs are going to hurt and charters are going to harm traditional public school. In Florida, that the opposite has happened.
Well, but you can't, and all the peer reviews said that there was no cause shown there. That those traditional public schools, they performed better because they were smart about the things that they did for their kids. It wasn't, you can't credit the vouchers for the public schools' performance. And they might have done even better had they had the resources that were given away to vouchers. You don't know that. But regardless, public funds are for the public good. And that,
And
I think
ESAs
that's
and
a
vouchers
point.
are public good because they're helping citizens of Mississippi.
Individuals,
See,
like the expense of the
we can
public.
ask our own questions if you don't have it. You can see. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you all for sharing. My question kind of deals with the criminal justice system as we see parents who have been jailed for sending their kids to schools outside of their district. So we're talking a lot about school choice, and we're choosing to send our children to another school that's not in the district, but we have to pay for it on the other end. And so with us kind of going into this area of school choice, do you think that we'll catch up with criminal justice and not punish people or rescind sentencing for people who have already been jailed because of sending their kids to different school districts?
I mean, I absolutely, like I could spend an hour on criminal justice reform, but I will tell you that's a travesty. We got moms that are doing anything to get their kid in a better education, and we ought to reward them and celebrate them for the sacrifices they make to get their kids a better education, not criminalize them, and we got to fix that.
And the structural problem here is that we have created school district boundaries that are fiefdoms in America. And so you can draw the district boundary how you want to draw it, and if you live on the wrong side of the track, so to speak, we can keep you out. And what happened in the 1970s was that when we started to see white flight from urban centers, in Michigan, there was a case called Milliken v. Bradley where Detroit started trying to bus metropolitan-wide so that you couldn't be in the white suburb and not have to integrate with the black inner city. Well, the Supreme Court came along and said, no, we're gonna stop the fight for equity at the school district boundary. And that has had tremendous impacts on equity issues in this country. Because what you see is now you're seeing, this has happened recently in Alabama. You see these white enclaves start to break off from the cities and then draw their little boundaries around themselves so they don't have to put their tax dollars, it is 100% to America's shame that we send mamas to jail trying to get a better education for their children. People believe education is freedom. They believe that. We have promised that in America, and we do not act like that at all.
And a potential policy answer to that is if the state would pay for facilities for school districts, because the problem is that the state doesn't. The state contributes nothing for our facilities, and so the local taxpayers are tasked with providing the funds to build school buildings. And so when you have an influx of people from outside the district that are creating a need for more classroom space, then the local people have to find a way to pay for that. If the state would pay for that, you would go a long way towards solving that problem.
All right, one last question.
Yes, what is the student-teacher ratio in these charter schools that you said are doing right by kids and having such a success rate?
Compared to
Right.
yeah, it's a good
Well,
question.
I just want the student, I mean, I pretty much know what it is in public schools.
Yes,
so.
I don't, so I've never heard of it.
So depending on depending on the school you're in, it's going to be slightly different. But because they operate on the same dollars, if you're in like an elementary school, for example, it's going to be 25 kids to one teacher. If you're in the middle schools, you may get up to 30 depending on the class. But it's going to be anywhere between 25 to 30 for one teacher. Now in the elementary schools, they do usually have a teacher and an aide for, say, a kindergarten class. But in the middle schools, you're typically going to have one teacher. You might have a special education teacher that comes in or that co-teaches. But you have to remember that the charter schools are operating on the same dollars that traditional public schools offer. Now, where they try to put more money into instruction is they typically have fewer administrators than a traditional public school. So they might have a principal, and they might have one other type of administrator that they call a dean of students, but then everybody else is going to be, for the most part, a teacher. So it's not that the charter schools are coming in and they have like 1 to 14 ratios or something like that. They actually have ratios that look exactly the same. And in fact, there was a question that one of the charter schools had because there's something in MAP about class sizes that says that if you have a class size over a certain amount, MDE can draw back your funds. And they were worried because they were going to have a class that had like 31 kids in it in like 5th grade. And they were worried that they were going to get their MAP dollars drawn back. But after we looked at the law, it looked like they were exempt from that particular rule under the state code so that they could do that. But what they do that is radically different is that they have a very strong emphasis on curriculum. They have a very strong emphasis on teacher training. They have a very strong emphasis on looking at data and using data to inform instruction. It is everything that we say that we think we should do in traditional public schools that we don't actually do for the most part. But charter schools are spending a tremendous amount of time training teachers, working on picking curricula that is evidence-based and implementing it as like in a very, very rigorous way. If you go into Reimagine Prep in Jackson, you will be amazed at what you see. I recently had a former superintendent tell me that it was the best instruction that she had ever seen when she went into Reimagine, and that it was consistent in every single classroom that she saw, and that is by design. It is by a tremendous amount of work by principals. You can recreate some of this in traditional public schools right now, so the question has always been, so why aren't we doing it? Why aren't we doing it? And it is a leadership problem. That is what it is.
Well, we are toward the end of our time, so I'm afraid, I'm sure these folks will stick around and talk to you one on one. But I want to thank our panel for coming out tonight and giving such passionate accounts of their views. And I want to thank you for doing this. This is the 5th time they've essentially done this. Yeah, I learn something new every single time, so thank you guys for doing it. And I also want to mention, at the Humanities Council, we have a great staff, we have a great board, we have Caroline Gillespie in the back, who's really kind of the secret weapon behind all of these programs. And we have one of our great longtime board members, Betty Lou Jones, in the front row, who's been a big supporter of the MAX, of Meridian, and thankfully of the Humanities Council as well. So thank y'all so much for coming. Eat some food, take it home with you, and good night. And we'll see you again, not them, but me, October 17th. Thank you.